my name's Heather. I'm a librarian here, and if you aren't a regular at our Tuesday book group, this is a meeting, technically, of books and lunch on Tuesdays, which the library offers every second Tuesday of the month at noon, and we discuss a different book every month. Next month's book, which I'll talk about at the end of the afternoon, is called The Hare with Amber Eyes by Edmund Duvall. And that we will discuss on January 8th. These books are available for checkout to anybody, regardless of whether or not you have a Howe library card, so we encourage you to come and participate, read the books. It's always a lively discussion. The staff who run these things always come up saying it's a great discussion and a great group, so we'd love to have more members. Today, we're doing a special BLT. We actually have the author of this month's book here with us, Catherine Britton. And so what's going to happen today will be a little bit different. This is an experiment. It's the first time we've ever had an author at a BLT. So she's going to talk and take questions for about half the time. And then we have the Dartmouth bookstore here, and they will be selling books. She'll sign books. We'll have a brief sort of 5 to 10 minute intermission for that to happen. And time permitting, at the end, we will discuss the book. And if people want to stay a little bit late so we can get in a full discussion, I'm happy to do that. Obviously, if you have a time commitment at the end of the afternoon you need to leave, that's also fine. Another little unusual thing for those who are regulars, there are evaluations in front of you, which we don't usually do at these, but because we have an author here, and this is a new thing for us, your feedback would be especially helpful in helping us figure out if this worked, how it worked, what we should do, again, what we should change. There are some pens on this table by the door and a fishbowl that you can drop them in when you're done, and I would very much appreciate your feedback if you have a few minutes at the end of our program today. Let me just tell you a little bit about Catherine, and then I will turn things over to her. She has a master's degree in creative writing from Dartmouth College and a master's in education from the University of Vermont. She's taught writing at Colby Sawyer College and at the Writers Center in White River Junction. And she will be teaching a class through Iliad this spring called First Get It Written, Then Get It Right. Catherine's screenplay, Goodbye Don't Mean Gone, was a Moondance Film Festival winner and a finalist in the New England Women in Film and Television Contest. She's a member of the League of Vermont Writers and the New Hampshire Writers Project. Her Sister's Shadow, which we are discussing today, was her debut novel, and it was published in June. She has a second novel, which will be called Little Island, scheduled to come out this fall. In Her Sister's Shadow, as I'm sure most or many of you have seen, two sisters confront their past in a story about secrets, rivalry, and loss. Catherine's tale is one in which her main character, Lily Niles, returns to her hometown and is forced to come to terms with her relationship with her older sister, Bee, and their shared tragic past. The book raises questions about whether we should keep secrets or tell the truth, about how our perceptions and others' perceptions of the same events can differ widely and lead to misunderstandings, and about love and relationships, among other topics. It certainly offers a lot to discuss, and I hope that we'll have time to dig into some of these questions later in the afternoon. For now, however, I'm very much looking forward to hearing Catherine, and I will turn things over to her.
Thank you very much. It is really nice to be here with all of you at Books with Lunch on Tuesday, and I want to really especially thank Heather. She's done an amazing job of setting this up and of publicizing this event. I've had people for a month stopping me in the co-op and various places saying, oh, I hear you're going to be at the Howe next month. And there was that great picture in the paper on Sunday that some of you might have seen. That, I will say, is my new author photo for the new book. So I slipped that over to Heather, and Valley News is, apparently somebody likes me over there because my picture seems to appear weekly now, and so that's been fun. But I've been thinking about libraries lately because of this event today, and last month I was over at the Norman Williams Library in Woodstock, which is a beautiful building, and they had a literary salon. We had 3 authors over there, and wine and cheese, and it was a great, fun evening. So I've been thinking about the difference, the subtle difference between promoting books and promoting reading. And bookstores are in the business of promoting books, which is a good thing if you're an author. Libraries, I think, their mission is really more to promote reading, as well as inquiry and community. So they hold a really special place in our community because of that. Also, they are repositories for our literary history. Bookstores cannot afford to keep books on the shelves endlessly unless they're selling, unless they're on the bestseller list. My book's been out 18 months. That is ancient history in the publishing world. The Dartmouth bookstore, I want to say, last time I was in, and I'm very grateful to them for this, still has my book on the shelf and prominently displayed, I will say, the last time I was in. That's not the case in most bookstores. After a month, 2 months, 3 months, they have to move you aside. You either have to earn your space on the shelf or your publisher needs to be paying for your space on the shelf. That's also how it works. So libraries hold a really special place for authors. Not that every library has my book, of course, but and can keep every book. But they do. That is part of the mission, to keep books around that you're not going to be able to find in bookstores easily. So anyway, I'm grateful to be here, and to all of you for supporting the local author. I live in Norwich, and the local library. So what I would love to do today is I can talk, but I'd much rather answer your questions if you have them. And use that as a springboard to guide my discussion. I'm happy to talk about the writing of Her Sister's Shadow, the manuscript that didn't sell, the one I'm working on now, what it's like to be a writer, what it's like to go through that road to publication, which it continues to be interesting. I'm in the middle of essentially rewriting Little Island, so I'm hoping it'll come out in September, but at this point I'm not so sure we'll get there. And then leave the discussion, how do you feel about B, Lily, and Charlotte? Do you like or dislike them? Are they sympathetic characters? Those are the sorts of questions that it's best that the author not be present when you're discussing them. I've visited a lot of book clubs in the past 18 months and have learned that it's best to just, let's do a question and answer, and then if you want to discuss it in more detail, and these are great questions, I guess Heather must have come up with them. I'd be happy to have you do that, but I think I'll step out of the room at that point. So I'll just open it to see if you have any questions. If you don't, I'll start talking, and then hope that you interrupt me with some questions. So with that, yes, good.
The process of writing this interests me, and to which garden did you go for these characters? And the writer's imagination is interesting to me.
Yeah.
And are these people you knew somehow? And so that process.
Great questions. Yeah, the first question I'm usually asked is, do I have sisters? We are told in our creative writing classes, write what you know. I do not have sisters. So there you go. Broke the first rule right away. My mother had three sisters. She also had three sisters. And I want to just hit the pause button a minute and ask how many have read the book. So I don't want to give away any plot. So almost all of you. Okay, good, as I just don't want to give anything away for people who haven't read it. So my mother also had two brothers. She lived on the South Shore of Boston, where Her Sister's Shadow is set. If you were wondering where is Whitehead, it is loosely modeled after Cohasset, where she grew up. So if you're familiar with the South Shore of Boston, Hingham, Cohasset, Situate, it's down there. You could not find your way around Cohasset using this book as a guide, but if you went to Cohasset, you will find Sandy Cove. And in the middle of Sandy Cove, you will find Big Big. So that is real. And if you went on my website and looked at the book trailer, the opening shot is Big Big, sitting in the middle of Sandy Cove. So my mother grew up in a big house overlooking Sandy Cove. This Sandy Cove doesn't look exactly like the real Sandy Cove, just for reasons that you need to move characters from place to place and have houses where they don't exist. But interesting question about an author's imagination. We observe things, we research things, and we make things up, or we think we are making things up. And part of what Her Sister's Shadow is about is coming home, going back to your hometown and finding that it has irrevocably changed and is no longer your hometown. It has moved on while you moved away. So I have a scene where Lily comes back to Sandy Cove and she's standing at the rim of the cove and she's looking over, trying to get a glimpse of her house and not seeing it. And she looks over and remembers the empty field that used to be on, and now there's a steel and glass contemporary house there, and she's bemoaning the loss of this. And we all have an empty field in our childhood home, and there's either a condo development in it or a shopping center or a school. So I did a reading in Cohasset the summer the book came out, and my cousin still lived there, and the couple that owned that glass and steel house that I thought I had made up and put in what I wasn't even sure there'd been an empty field in San Diego, were there. Unfortunately, they have a good sense of humor, and so you know, some of it I thought I was making up, some of it I went and reminded myself, what does the yacht club look like in Cohasset, and so I tell people it took between 2 and 50 years to write this book. It is the debut novel. So it's based loosely on stories that my mother told. They did have a sister who died. Not this way, but there was a sister who died. So part of what the book was about is family tragedy and how do families deal with that. Do they talk about it? Or as in the case of my mother's family, do they not talk about it? And what's the consequence of that? And if you were going to assign blame, who would you point the finger at, and what would be the consequence of trying to understand a death when no one's talking about it, and who was at fault? So that was really what you know, undergirded my question was there blame? My aunt died of rheumatic fever, after effects of rheumatic fever, but there was still a story that was told. My mother, her youngest sister in that case, was 16 years younger than my mother, was the oldest. B and not B. There are some elements of my mother in the character of B, elements of my grandmother in her, and all those wonderful New England ladies who are honest to a fault and speak their mind, and yeah. I'm looking at Kate here because. So my mother told the story of Mary, her sister, who had recovered from rheumatic fever, and then the youngest sister in the family wanted to sleep in her room with her because she adored her. She's only 6 at the time, the littlest one. And so she did, and then Mary came down with the summer complaint and died from that. And I'd hear the story when I was very young and think, does my mother blame her sister for Mary's death? You know, inadvertent, but so that was the genesis for the book, was how do families get themselves out of this? I wanted to answer the question for myself. And so I wrote it when I was doing the MALS program, the creative writing program at Dartmouth. I took screenwriting, and I wrote this as a screenplay because I had to write a 120-page script in 10 weeks. Yeah. And I had tried writing this as a novel in the early 90s, had literally reams of material, none of it forward-moving. I had character studies and conversations and backstory and all this, but no plot, essentially. And so then I took screenwriting, had to write this script, and I thought, well, I've got a lot of material, all I need is a plot. And screenplays really demand that of you. They are 120 pages, lots of white space on those pages. You know, you just set a scene, put some people in it, and get on to the next one. Found the plot, and then started rewriting it, turning it back into a novel in 2007, and we sold it right at the beginning of 2010. So the writing of it this took about 2 years, but it had been a lifetime of collecting stories and attempting.
Yeah. There's quite a bit about sailing and the technical part of sailing, and also there's quite a bit of flowers. Those are the two things. Do you sail? I mean, or is that something you read about and had to, you know, kind of imagine?
I have sailed, but I'm not a sailor. My mother was on the women's national sailing team. She was quite a sailor. We did have a boat when I was younger, so I sailed so a lot of it was in me, a lot of just the language and terminology. I did have people who were racers. I never raced, So I did have some people read the manuscript and make some suggestions for how I could make, tighten it up a little and change some of the language. I do garden incessantly as soon as the weather warms up. And I will say that as many flowers as there are still in here, my editor made me take a lot of them out. She was just a little too many flowers in there for her. She lives in New York City, doesn't know, what can I say? So that I could just look outside for those flowers in that garden. Yeah.
The character of, my first name?
Randall. Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Why?
Why what?
What? Where did you get him from?
Partly on my father. I think he just kind of represents an opportunists and people who are not born into a certain society and want to be there and are just sort of just outside it. And would like that was Randall's thing. He wanted to be part not only of that society but of that family. Yeah. Yep.
How did you come to know yourself as a writer?
Or have I come to know myself as a writer?
Or when?
When did I decide I wanted to be a writer?
Yes, yes.
I think I always wanted to be. I thought I was in a different line. I thought I was in the reader line, not in the writer line. I thought authors were, Louisa May Alcott was an early influence, and certainly on this book as well, the Four Sisters and so forth and so on. And also I grew up in part in Wayland, and she was in Concord, and so were the March sisters. And so there was this conflation of families, my mother's family and the Alcotts and the Marches. But I didn't, I just didn't know how to get there. I didn't know how writers got started. And so really it was very late. I'd done some freelance writing for years, but in terms of writing fiction, I started the Mouse program in 2001. So, and that was really, I'm either, I'm going to stop whining about it. I want to be a writer. And do it. So pretty recently, yeah. And I did mention the manuscript that didn't sell. That was rejected by 25 editors. So I think the thing that sets me apart from, I have a lot of friends, writer friends, who are working on manuscripts, have been working on manuscripts for years. And that's the problem. They don't finish them. And I had a goal. I think starting late gave me that initiative, that necessity I don't have forever. And so I, finished manuscripts and figured out how to query agents and who those agents might be, and started doing it and started getting rejected. But as soon as I was there, I felt like, okay, I'm in the other line now. So I just kept going. And eventually I got lucky, and they say if you get to choose between smart and lucky, pick lucky. And I got lucky and got an agent, but didn't sell the first manuscript. The third editor, who got this at a publishing house, and it's Berkeley Books, which is an imprint of Penguin, so it's it's one of the big now Penguin House, as we're calling it, or Random Penguin. They've just merged with the Random House Penguin House. Made an offer. She didn't make the offer until she had made the suggestion that I make Bee and Lily younger. Bee was 72 when I wrote this first, and Lily was 72 and Bee was 80.
Oh. Wow.
Izzy was the granddaughter. There was another generation. Their childhood was in during the war in the 40s. So they wanted them to be younger and Bee to be nicer. So if you don't like Bee now, you should have met her before. So I did that. I thought about it and thought, boy, you know, that really would tighten the plot up and make Lily's motivation to get home and patch things up would be a lot more believable. And so I did it, and it didn't take all that long, surprisingly, and then they bought it. The Little Island, the one that I'm working on now, is about a family who lives on an island in Maine. Again, looking at Kate, where you still live in Maine. And I wrote it from the mother's point of view. She's 64, name is Grace Little, and they own an inn, Little Island Inn. And so her mother has died about 3 months before, and she's planning the memorial service. And she found a note when her mother died that said, "Grace, flowers by the water, have fun." And so Grace is determined. She does garden, of course. All of my characters garden, and they all own dogs. And they live on an island. So water, flowers, no problem. To have fun, though, as her adult children and 2 of her grandchildren come back to the island, less of a guarantee. This is not the outcome that we usually get when the littles get together. And so I wrote the whole book from Grace's perspective, that each character has their own section, because everybody's wheeling more than just their suitcase behind them. There's more baggage coming through the door. And they bought the book, or wanted the book, and said, how about telling it from the older daughter's point of view? Which is why it's taking me quite a while to revise it. You know, I'm still with Grace, but the older daughter now I'm amplifying her story and trying to find her journey through this weekend. So it's not what I expected. I thought, you know, they bought your book and then they printed your book and then there you are, but not so much.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
I'm back on both books now and asked you to kind of change the direction of it.
Well, that's a very good question. I had a question similar to that as I gave a talk last summer, I guess it was summer, and said, could you ever imagine a time when someone would ask you to do something that you wouldn't be willing to change? And all I could say was, I hope so, at that point. Now, having worked it took a while for the editor to get her notes back to me, so it's been a very intense few weeks of doing this. And you sort of have to move the book from the heart to the head to do this. That's what I've had to do. I did write the story I wanted to write. They want, I'm sorry to say this, to sell ebooks, the publisher. And ebooks are bought by a younger demographic, a younger generation. So the book needs to be about younger people, they think. So, and I would like to sell the book, but then, well, what book? And so it's challenging. I don't want to have my name on a book that I don't want to write. And so it's, how can I tell this story in a way that allows me to maintain my own integrity and at the same time satisfy what the publisher is looking for? Because I view us as in a partnership. My agent said, no, they don't want to partner with you. Oh, really? But, so it's, that's an ongoing dialogue.
What's the age of the older sister in the current one?
39.
39.
Yeah.
Is the older sister.
Yeah.
And the younger?
The younger sister is a twin, a set of twins, and they are 37. Yeah.
How did you choose the title, or did they use the title?
That's a great question. I chose it, or I suggested it. My original title was Lily's Garden. And they liked it, but they didn't love it. So they said, come up with another title. They don't schedule your book till it has a title. So I got right on that one. And there are obviously a lot of sisters in this story. There are also a lot of shadows, and I noticed one of your questions is about that. And I think, you can decide what you think later, but that it's, everybody is standing in somebody else's shadow in this book, to me. That's how I view it. And so I set that down with about maybe 4 others, and I could just picture my editor walking down the hall saying, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? And so the votes all came back that the word sister apparently has something of a magical magnetic jump off the shelf into your hand. So, and I like it. I like it. And I love the cover, which I had nothing whatsoever to do with, but yeah, looks a little more contemporary than I would, but it's good. It's good. Yes.
Those of us who live in New England, especially from decayed cities that were once brilliant, have wonderful material. I come from New Bedford, Massachusetts, which was once the most wealthy town in the country, whaling and so forth, and my grandfather was all involved in that. Now it is poverty-stricken, and so I found that the material is too great for me to cover in a novel. So I write poetry based on that. And people love it. They love to read about decayed, once wealthy New England towns. It's wonderful. So any of you that are from New England and have that kind of a background, you won't find it difficult to publish poetry on that very pitiable subject.
Yeah, that's great. Good for you. Yeah, it's an interesting what's happening as, you know, I did a piece one time about 95 or 91 coming up Vermont and what happened to the towns that it didn't touch, who were very prosperous, and then the towns that it did touch, and the arguments about who got the interchange and who didn't get the interchange and who wanted one and who didn't want one, and that, you know, as manufacturing gets shipped overseas, and, you know, these changes, so people don't think, of the consequences of an industry whaling no longer being an industry, a viable industry, and what happens to the towns.
It's really poverty-stricken and heavily policed because the fishermen have to bring in drugs now. There's no more whaling oil, so they bring in drugs, and unfortunately it's created also social problems. So I'm glad I'm from New Bedford.
Interesting your comments about the age change.
Yeah.
The older age would really have affected me here. Yeah, I like the younger.
Oh, good. That's
Yes,
good. That's
yes.
good.
It's as if it's an age where there's more ambiguity
Yeah.
in life.
And more potential for things to change.
Yes.
And have an
Yes,
impact
yes,
on the
yes.
life. Yeah. I still sometimes in my mind, B is still older. And I read this and I think, I wonder if people see that. And some readers have said, yeah, I saw her as older. Because of course she's somewhat diminished, and it could be age-related, you know, much more arguably if she were 80 than I think she ended up at 67. And I have a whole other set of families and ages in my head. And that was why I came up with the drug interaction, because that certainly can happen. Somebody's grief-stricken and they start taking the wrong pills, and even if they're taking the right pills, you can get tinnitus and different things that can make you hard of hearing or just lightheaded or something. But it took me a while to come up with that. Some conferring with some other writer friends. How can I?
Do you think this will ever be a movie?
Oh,
I think it would be wonderful.
thank you. I would love to see it. So far, no interest. I did have one gentleman in England. He lives in this country, but he wanted to shoot it in England, just as a short, downloadable film. I sort of had that reaction too through Tesco. If you've been to England, you know that's the big grocery store chain over there, and I guess they have an online presence. But he wanted them older. And because he had an actress in mind. So my agent does have sub-agents on the West Coast, and this did get, when I wrote it as a screenplay, it did get sent to Hallmark, I think Lifetime. The dark parts in here were a little too dark for Hallmark. Lifetime apparently only now does women in peril stories. Seriously. so it wasn't right for that. So it hasn't, you know, now, somebody will just need to fall in love with this and be willing to spend the time and money it takes to do a feature film if they wanted to do that, and hope that it's another The King's Speech, you know, because it's not exactly Terminator or whatever, you know, the kinds of movies that are getting.
How many books have you sold?
I think around maybe 13,000. Yeah, I did earn back my advance, which if you know anything about how things work with books, they give writers advances and then you have to earn that back before you start collecting royalties. And they don't expect many fiction writers to earn back their advance. Of course, my advance wasn't huge. And certainly not debut authors. So my editor said, it's done reasonably well, which is the new phenomenal. So, with that vote of confidence, yeah. But so yeah.
How did you go about your search for an agent?
Pretty traditional way, which is looking at the acknowledgments in books that I liked, and they sometimes will say thanks to my agent and give a name. Publishers Weekly puts out a hot new deals, and they'll show who sold what to whom and who agented the deal. Online there are websites that give agents, list agents and what kinds of books they represent. Then I also went to conferences, at least two conferences I think, where you get to say ahead of time, they'll say, here are the 10 agents who are going to be there. You pick the 3 that do women's fiction, et cetera, and then you get 5 minutes to go face to face and give them your elevator pitch. And I wrote, having done all of that, I contacted anyone I know who had an agent. I would contact them. I would ask them, is it, may I? And they would say yes or no. They all said yes. And so when that gives you go, right in through the back door. I mean, you're definitely, most of them said no, but they at least asked to see the manuscript, which is what you want. To just get past that, just get in the front door. And one of them eventually did agree to represent me.
Did I hear you correctly earlier in the talk that you actually sent the manuscript to an agent or several agents, or maybe I misheard? Prior to obtaining an agent, you sent the manuscript out to them. Did I hear that?
No,
okay.
no. You start pretty much with a query letter and a synopsis,
Okay.
and then they tell you whether they want the full manuscript or not. I might have mentioned that the one manuscript on Goodbye Don't Mean Gone, which was the script that won the award and didn't sell as a novel, that manuscript, via my agent, went out to 25 editors, and they rejected it, including the one I have now, the editor for this.